What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Daily Dish Big 12 Tournament Edition. I'm your host, Christian Royston, joined by my co-host, Logan Shanks, and I've got special guest, Connor Ferguson.
What's up? Thanks for having me.
Yep, no problem.
It's a pleasure.
CycloneFanatic. And then, of course, Brett with the women's basketball reporter. So, crazy game against Baylor. I think I said it was a coin flip going into it, and then it kind of turned out to be a close game, kind of what we expected. I mean, you were there, so I guess what did you see?
Well, I think we saw a pretty even first half. Baylor and Iowa State were kind of going shot for shot with each other. First quarter, Iowa State did kind of get into a bit of a rut. They kind of had a little bit of a scoring drought, but that kind of ended after Audie Crooks made a three. And we were talking to her post-game, and she said she got the green light from Bill Fenley, and that kind of gave them some more momentum throughout the rest of the first half.
Yeah, talk about a big moment. I think she doesn't shoot a lot of threes, and she doesn't shy away from working on it, right? Like, she knows that she's not a bona fide three-point shooter, but Bill will tell a lot of his players, just shoot the ball. If I give you a red light and you're putting up a shot, I don't want you thinking about that in the back of your head. Like, if I miss this, I'm coming out of the game. He does frequently sub players and do that and teaches them. But anytime a three goes up from Audie, because it's so rare, you're kind of looking at it going, whoa, I don't know about that one. And it hit the rim 3 times.
Yeah, it bounced around and finally dropped.
So that was like, it gave you, in a big game like that, there's moments where you go, this is a momentous play. This is like a big thing that didn't necessarily change the game. It's the first quarter, but you're not getting a lot of those in the opening 5, 6, 7 minutes. And that was one of the first like big momentum swings. Like, oh, Iowa State's got its swagger going a little bit. And then Bellinger hit one right after that. So that's a massive time in the game.
Yeah, and I like the quote that she had after the game where she was like, I got the green light. I was kind of like seeing that thing bounce around like, oh, please go in, please go in. I want this green light to actually be worth it. And then, of course, it did fall. So what a great moment.
Yep. And then kind of going into the second half there, Iowa State, they were down at the half, weren't they? No, they were up at the half. 36-31.
Yeah,
up by 5. Going into the third quarter, though, they were down by 2. It was a bit of a rough third quarter for them.
Yeah, they had it to 7 right out of the halftime break, I think. And then they had 3 or 4 possessions where it could have completely swayed things, that you open the door and you start putting the gas pedal down, whatever cliche you want me to go with bad journalism by me. But yeah, Baylor stayed hanging around, and that's kind of the key in those moments where you're not really taking charge of a game. And then eventually, once they took the lead, it was that scoreless drought in the fourth quarter where Baylor got in front, and they only had 2 threes in it, but they didn't score. Iowa State didn't score for like 4.5 minutes. And typically, if you have a almost 5-minute scoreless drought in the final 10 minutes of a game, you're not winning it. Yeah. And they held them to, it was 2 3-pointers, same girl made them. But they hung around to be able to be in a spot to take the game. So,
and I really thought it was starting to get out of hand. Baylor they came out with a big press in the third quarter, and it really frazzled Iowa State. They had a couple turnovers back to back. Baylor grabs a couple quick baskets. So Iowa State called a timeout.
Yeah, no, that's what you were referring to. It was out of the timeout with 3:21 to go in the third. And Iowa State just got in their heads. I mean, you have to be better against the press. There's two separate times where someone corralled the ball, 2 different players, and I try not to crap on singular players like doing mistakes and stuff. But it was 2 of them were bringing it up and just stepped out of bounds while being guarded or got bumped out of bounds. It's like, where the line is. You got to stay a little bit further away from that, not make that mistake.
And you kind of thought that something like that would happen, especially when you're going up against a veteran team like Baylor with a young team like Iowa State.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, like, they're inexperienced, but they're 30 games in now. You can't make mistakes like that. You're going to cost yourself. And at the very least, they saw what the mistakes do, and they overcome it. It's, you don't want to see, as a fan, you don't want to see your team go through that. But this team has like a weird, we're going to go through it a little bit, definitely, but we're going to get around it at some point. And I don't know, most teams either get better and they don't go through it or they never overcome it. So it's a peculiar group, but a really fun one this season for sure.
Yeah, that must just be something with Iowa State teams just dealing with adversity. I mean, we hear TJ talking about it all the time with the men's team. And, I mean, going back to the press, I mean, that feels like something that Iowa State's kind of struggled with just forever. I mean, when I covered them last year, the best way to beat them was to press them. That's what Texas did. That's what Baylor was doing. And then it seemed like when they started to fall apart there in the third, it's because of the press, and it was causing mistakes. I mean, turnovers was just the big thing that I saw.
And especially when you're just trying to get the ball into Audi, if you just press them and don't allow them to get the ball inside, that takes away a major scoring factor for Iowa State.
And you talk about those turnovers. Audi got called for so many travels in that
It
game.
was 6 or 7.
Yeah,
I don't know which number it was, and I still have terrible journalism by me. I've referenced this on 4 different occasions. I haven't looked the specific number. It was 6 or 7. I'm almost positive though.
But yeah, you factor that in. And I mean, she was still the force that she always is, led scoring with 23. But you've got to think that if those don't get called or if that doesn't happen, those are possessions that Iowa State likely can turn into points and use those to try and maybe negate that setback that they had there in that third quarter.
Yeah, and I mean, we're kind of talking as if they lost. We're going really into the bad sides of it.
I mean, there's good and bad sides to every game, right?
Yeah,
like
that's
I
true.
think they were lucky to get out of that with a win for sure.
Oh, yeah.
Just with everything that went into it and the execution that they missed on. But they know that they're going to go to the drawing board and figure it out. Just like this Oklahoma game, this is the only team that put them away at home, right?
Yeah.
Like for either men's or women's.
Well, this
all season.
Oklahoma team is really good.
Yeah,
So.
they're no slouches. I don't think it will look like a game that, not to move on from the Baylor stuff, but I don't think that Monday game is going to look as lopsided as it did at Hilton.
Yeah, for sure.
They got out of that game early, and this is going to sound really dumb, which is completely fine. That's my brand. There's like a vibes, kind of a feel of every event that you're going to. It can be eerie when a race car driver crashes, stuff like that. And you can have a game where you're just not in it. And you're there's no hope that you're going to complete this comeback because every time you hit a 3, Oklahoma's coming down the court and hitting one more in your face. So I don't think it will get that bad. You still have to start strong. Say it's tied after a quarter. I don't see any way Oklahoma wins by more than 12.
Yeah, and I mean, you talk about car crashes. I mean, we'll get into the Iowa State Kansas State game here in a bit, but that's kind of the thing that came to my mind. But I mean, I think the biggest thing to me, I mean, we threw on the game. We were watching it throughout our time up to Manhattan, but we were really primed in those last few minutes when Emily Ryan seemed to kind of take over.
Yeah, and they were simply just the better team in those last 5 minutes, or really the last 2 minutes in general, which, we had it on about to tip off for Kansas State, and we're like, okay, well, are we going into overtime here, or what's going to – I mean, you felt like it was a possibility, but I honestly think if Iowa State goes into overtime, they probably lose.
Yeah, they could have, definitely. But, I mean, yeah, like you said, Emily Ryan really took over. Iowa State had an 8-0 run to finish out the game. I mean, they trailed by 3 points there late, and then Emily Ryan hits 6 free throws, like in a minute and a half left in the game to seal it, and that was kind of the big difference. And she also had a big accolade in this one, too. She had 10 assists in the game and passed the record for all-time assists in Iowa State history. So that was pretty cool that she was able to do that. But it wasn't just their offensive effort in the fourth quarter. It was the defense, too. Baylor shot the ball so poorly. 3 for 24 from the field is insanely bad.
And they kept getting chances. Like, they were getting the offensive rebounds, too, but they were just putting up, honestly, just, like, low percentage shots, which, I mean, didn't surprise me when they were missing them.
Yeah, Dreuna Edwards. There's an apostrophe in there, a little comma to the top.
Yeah.
I think I'm getting it right. She hit a 3 in the third to close out the third quarter, and then she does the 3 goggle to the stands and stuff. Like, I love that stuff, that aspect of things. Like, please celebrate your success. I'm totally pro that. And in the fourth quarter, she made her next 2 3-point attempts. She only shot one more the rest of the entire game. And it's like, I know, like, she's a post, like, you don't expect them to shoot a bunch of threes, but I'm like, why'd you go away from that when no one else can make a thing? I was very perplexed down the stretch of what's going on. And then there's the stretch where the officials are just seemingly as inconsistent as you can get. I'm not harping on them because they called bad things against Iowa State or vice versa. It just, nothing made sense. Every whistle was like, man, you really need to put yourself in this situation. Like, what are we doing here? And that gets everybody out of rhythm. And I mean, probably helped Iowa State in a massive aspect in winning that game. So
Yeah, Hilton South.
Yeah, exactly. And it was kind of interesting, too, because of the way that the tournament was set up this year, being on different weekends, the fans still showed out. I mean, the support was definitely there, and that might have had something to do with their little push at the end to get them over the hump.
Brett Yormark is very lucky Iowa State fans exist.
Yeah, they filled that stadium.
I think
Different breed.
I wasn't in the arena, but I have it on good accounts from people that were in the arenas that the Iowa State Baylor crowd was more people there than the combined 6 games prior to it.
Oh, wow.
I mean, I guess I could see that. Iowa State does travel well, which is kind of something that we brought up quite a bit with just not only basketball, but also football. When it comes to, like, deciding bowl games, I feel like we also get or Iowa State gets favored a bit just because Iowa State fans do travel well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good thing to have, you know.
I mean, we saw it. We saw how it helped against Baylor, and I mean, it's going to help going forward, especially.
It helps CycloneFanatic quite a bit, too.
That's true. That's true.
I did want to bring up that I saw a clip. I think Athletics posted of Bill Fennelly, who, I mean, was just getting teared up. Everyone was getting teared up at the end of that game. So you really see kind of like the emotions that they were going through with whoever brought up that last 4-game stretch that they went on, and to continue that. I talked about it in the last podcast, but I think it was just a brilliant idea by him to do that. Just kind of have this mini season at the end and just really essentially, I mean, Christian's not going to say it, but lock in and kind of get the job done going into the postseason, which we saw that they did.
And he'll tell you this, he'll do that a lot in a season, and you just reference it when it works. And he'll say that to you straight up. Different words, I mean, I'm sugarcoating it, but Bill's awesome. He's a great guy, and that was they needed to win 3 of those 4 games to set themselves up in a good spot, and now you've won 5 in a row. So it definitely worked, Bill.
Yeah, and I mean, especially going into the next games, if they kind of want to recreate the magic that happened last year, they kind of have the same storybook ending if they would do it again.
And the unique thing for them is they got so much rest between the end of the Big 12 tournament, whether they make the title or not, and Selection Sunday. And you're just going to sit there and get healthy. You know, that's a massive thing for any team. This Iowa State team specifically, I think it'll help them a lot. I know the conference season kind of dragged on, but, you know, it does for everybody.
And with BYU in the conference now, we are recording this on Sunday, and typically...
Are we allowed to do that with BYU?
What do you mean?
Well, they're
Record
not
on
allowed to
Sunday?
compete on Sunday, but we're competing right now.
That's true.
But
But it's going to come out on a Monday. So
true.
Okay, so
But-
we're getting around it like
We're
that.
good, we're good.
All right, cool.
The rest, you bring up the rest, and I think it's huge to actually have this extra day of rest for Iowa State going into their semifinals match on Monday.
Because it gives you more time to prepare for this Oklahoma team that beat you as bad as they did in Ames. And I know we talked about it on Friday when we recorded the first pod when we got down here of maybe Baylor's going to have some momentum heading into the game on Saturday. You know, they already played Texas Tech a day prior. And, you know, Iowa State having that extra time of rest, maybe they were a little rusty. We didn't really see that. It was fairly even the whole way. So, like you said, Connor, with this extra rest between the Big 12 tournament and the NCAA tournament, it could end up being a very good thing for Iowa State.
Yeah, and it's just time to get your mind right, get healthy, and, you know, think about where you're going to go and kind of scout teams that you think you might face. Now, the women's committee, I think, is just as every bit as inconsistent as the men's one. So it's really tough. They're not going to do a scouting report on any teams. They're not going to have that much of a idea of who they're going to play. But they're just going to take the time, get healthy, and they'll practice. They have the women's program has days called Iowa State days where they just practice how they play and they work on what they do well, and that's been a philosophy that has been long had by Bill, and that will probably be the focus on those 5 days in between. 5 days, Selection Sunday and the championship.
Tuesday to
Sunday, yeah.
Sunday, yeah.
It is Selection Sunday.
Selection Sunday happens on Sunday.
Yep.
Well, maybe with BYU, we never know.
That's true. Why is the bracket still coming out on a Sunday?
Well, bracket's probably coming out on Monday.
I feel
then,
so
huh?
bad for the BYU people that have to go through that.
Yeah, it is kind of weird that even though they were eliminated in the first round, we still technically have to game plan around them.
You
making
always
it all
have
the
to
way,
because there's
so.
always the chance they're going to be there.
Yeah, which
Chance.
there is a chance. Same like there's a chance that Iowa State wins it all again back to back.
I mean, they're
So
First
1
two
in
opponents this
4
year.
chance, right?
Yeah, 1 in 2 chance either happens or it doesn't.
exactly.
Oh, there you go.
50-50.
Yeah,
But, I mean, you look at how the tournament shaped up last year, Baylor, Oklahoma, Texas, the same thing could happen this year. Iowa State beat Baylor. They're playing Oklahoma, and Texas is there in the other semifinal.
Yeah, I just realized that. It did not dawn on me at all.
that's what
Yeah,
we were
that's
talking
kind-
about the
that's
last podcast. Is
Time is a
it could
flat
happen
circle.
again. I mean, same. What is it? Same story, different year.
I mean, they entered this one. No one really thought they had a chance. They entered last year. No one really thought they had a chance.
True.
They got it done last year. And this year they finished with a better record in the regular season for Big 12 play than last year. And they weren't expected to do really anything with this new squad. So the sky might be the limit this year.
I know. And you talk about seasons dragging on. It has to feel like it's dragging on forever for this just pretty much mostly freshman team. They have not played this many games in
Yeah.
a basketball season before.
Yeah, you get your dog days of summer, whatever that phrase is for baseball players, and it is very real. It can happen to the best of any player, hitting the freshman wall or getting to that middle part of the season where it's like, man, it just feels like we're playing meaningless games and I'm just supposed to go out and, hopefully I play well, don't really care if we win or lose. Not accusing any Iowa State player of that. It's a USHL guy. Don't worry about it. But no, it does drag on. But once you get to March, now you're in the Big 12 semifinals or the quarterfinals. And, there's a bigger, meaningful aspect to the game. And it kind of, if you have the right players, it can push you over that hump like it did on Saturday.
Yeah, for sure. And then, I mean, you talk about meaningless games and eyes on March. I mean, we can shift over to Iowa State versus Kansas State because, I mean, that was a game that I know going into it, TJ was like, well, we're focused on this next game. We're not focused on the Big 12 tournament. This is the only game that matters for us. But halfway through that, it really seemed like they were already looking ahead. They were in Kansas City.
Yeah, and you have to think that outside of just being able to play this game at Hilton, it would be different. Not even just win-loss, but they'd have a different attitude kind of going into it. You could kind of tell with the way that they were playing. Best way to describe it for me is uncharacteristic. They just generally play like themselves for large parts of that game. They go through scoring droughts, and we're going run for run in the first half, and they kind of had a big run in the second half as well. But for the most part, they just did not play like themselves. You could tell they were looking for next week.
Yeah, and I mean, they were ahead for a good amount of that first half, and seemed like it was the Iowa State that we were used to. They were forcing turnovers. They were making opportunities off them, and then by the end of that first half, it flipped, and then Kansas State was pretty much just running Iowa State's defense. They were creating more turnovers. They were dominating the points off turnovers category, which is they ended up still almost doubling them in points off turnovers. And Iowa State just was not shooting well. And it was just one of those games well, Iowa State's offense isn't working. Maybe their defense can win the game. But when Kansas State's defense is doing better than Iowa State's defense, that's kind of the switch that I saw.
Yeah, the concern I have with this team and is this going to be a reoccurring thing? It's year 3. It's hard to compare those first 2 teams to this TJ team. But are they getting so torn down playing such drastic defense that February comes around and the end of the season's really hard? Now, they're winning games still, 8-2 in their last 10. And any Iowa State fan would love to have that in any capacity. But are they too tired to where it will impact them in the postseason? We'll find out. And you get some rest this week. Give it that. They have, an extra 2 days to where they typically would play a game in between a Saturday, Wednesday.
Yeah, instead of like a 4-day stretch, it's nearly a week.
So you got a little bit more time to rest up and heal up. And I don't think TJ is going to punt on the Big 12 tournament or anything. I don't really believe coaches do that. I don't think anyone's wired to. Maybe Bill Self. Maybe Bill Self's that smart that he's like, yeah, I guess we will just roll them out there and, go home early. But you're going to get the rest this week. We'll see if that helps them. But, yeah, it seems like down the stretch in February, TJ's teams get tired, worn down, whether that's injury luck or playing hard defense, and I think both have some sort of an impact on it. But Keyshawn Gilbert and Taman Lipsey both, get them as much rest as you can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you brought up Keyshawn because that was a player that, you talk about just the wear and tear of the season and the defense that they play. Keyshawn's hitting the floor like every other possession. Taman's hitting the floor every possession. These guys, obviously Taman's dealt with injuries in the past. He's kind of worn down. And you kind of see this almost like dip in points at this part of the season, the last 4 to 5 games, where maybe it is that Keyshawn is kind of getting beaten and battered in the paint, and he's trying his best to create stuff, but his body's kind of getting worn down. And there was a few falls yesterday that I didn't even know if he was going to get back up from.
Yeah, he got checked out for a little bit. He got fouled, and you had Hassan Ward shooting his free throws. But TJ's not going to tell Keyshawn and Taman to not, play their style. That's just has what's worked for them, and it just sucks. Kind of what you guys are alluding to is the wear and tear of the season, playing like that. But there's no doubt in my mind that they're going to come back on Thursday, play the same way, and probably just look better with the extra rest that they got and being able to look at the film from Saturday. Yeah,
that's the biggest takeaway I had from what TJ was saying was that he was like, this is a one-off game. All right, this is in the rearview mirror already. I don't really care how we played this game because, it was uncharacteristic. We're tired, we're not focused, whatever. We're going to be focused when it actually matters. And he's like, now we're actually playing games that matter. And I think that was the big thing is that Kansas State was hungry for a win because they're still fighting for a tournament spot where Iowa State isn't just locked up in the tournament already. They are locked in a higher seed. And they pretty much already had the 2 seed for the Big 12 tournament. So they're kind of just like...
Yeah, what sucks about that loss is you can kind of would have guaranteed a spot in Omaha, and I'm not Mr. Bracketology. I'm not just looking at ESPN. Everything kind of had Iowa State slated around it too. Those projections have moved to 3s, and knew it was going to. Iowa State's not being talked about like the other top 8 teams for whatever reason you want to attribute that to. But if you win that game that you led 11-2 in at the start and look like that you're going to take their lunch money, you end up winning that, and you're kind of, maybe one win away from really guaranteeing that you get that number 2 seed and you go to Omaha. It's 2 hours away. Iowa State fans are going to go there easy. And that aspect of it is there's still something to play for there.
Yeah. In terms of going to Omaha in this game, being the way to get to Omaha, I can see how it would matter. But I feel like that's still kind of like a gamble. It's just winning this game would guarantee that, there's a lot of stuff that I feel like could still happen. I feel like Iowa State could still get Omaha. That's just kind of up in the air at this point. And I know it would increase their chances, but at the end of the day, I feel like at this point, he kind of moved on. He's looking at the Big 12 championship right now because, yes, it would be good for Cyclone fans to travel, a very short distance, but I think we've also seen Cyclone fans travel long distances too.
Yeah, Memphis counts, right? I've seen Iowa State fans in Orlando. They'll go wherever, and that's it's just advantageous.
It would just be better.
Yeah, people will say, like, oh, it doesn't matter because the fans are so loyal. And it's like, well, there's going to be a lot more that want to drive 2 hours than 19. Doesn't really, frankly, matter where
That's
it
true.
is, you know? So, yeah, you want Omaha for sure.
Yeah, it would be nice, but I mean, at this point, I feel like I don't know. They just weren't focused. I mean, it just really didn't seem like the Iowa State we were used to in Manhattan. I mean, it could have also been the crowd. I mean, it was pretty. It almost like
How was it? How was the atmosphere compared to
It
Hilton?
was. I was surprised. For
I mean,
sure.
we weren't expecting it to be as packed as it was. I mean, spring break, last game of the season, with the women's tournament going on pretty close by, you're like, maybe not everybody travels, but it was pretty packed in there. And I mean, you could tell that Iowa State would do something good and it would just be like pin drop. But then, any sort of momentum shift. I mean, it was pretty much just like how Hilton kind of feels Iowa State. Any sort of momentum shift was just.
Did it compare to the
excellent.
Kansas game? Because I thought Iowa State fans, like, during that game, that atmosphere, were so focused on winning it.
Yeah.
In terms of, like, you go to a sporting event to have fun and you kind of let loose, do whatever you do. When Iowa State had the ball during that Kansas game, I've never heard Hilton quieter. And it was like attention to detail in the stands for that one game.
That's kind of how it felt like, is that everybody in that stadium was willing Kansas State to win. And it just seemed like it almost seemed impossible for Iowa State to come back in that, which, this is kind of how I assume teams feel when they go to Hilton.
And I think at first Kansas State fans were kind of surprised. Like, they were kind of, like, oh, it's a regular game. They'd probably lose since it's Iowa State. But then when they saw that kind of momentum shift towards, like, the end of the first half and especially the beginning of the second half, that's when they really started to get into it.
It helps a lot when a coach makes baseless accusations against a program of accusations of cheating without any proof, never proof to be had, and then the return game comes and that fan base has latched onto that without any proof and they were hyped for it. Like, that's what you knew that part of it was going to come. It was going to be, I don't want to call it their Super Bowl. I'm not poking at Kansas State fans, but if you sincerely think TJ Otzelberger had a guy in the stands videoing a timeout huddle in live time, or any of the accusations that Tang didn't make publicly into a microphone but leaked to a reporter without any proof, it's such a shady, like, thing to do. I mean, yeah, I've said what I said. I'd still like Kansas State fans, great people. If you think Iowa State cheated, you're dead stupid.
Oh yeah, I do love Kansas State's like
The department's really nice.
Yeah.
Everyone there.
But
Now we're over complimenting them.
Yeah,
Don't do that.
but I am glad you brought that up, because I really did think that Jerome Tang was going to be a factor in this game. I mean, we saw how he was at Hilton. I thought that the second he saw TJ,
He
something
went and
would
told,
snap.
he went and told Coach. He tattletaled on the fake camera spire.
Yeah, but I mean, during the game, and I mean, he kept his cool pretty much the whole time, even when Iowa State was up 11-2, up 18-10. I mean, he kept his cool and he was kind of doing his own thing. And then afterwards, he's happy. I think maybe senior night had cooled down the nerves, and there was just a lot of stuff going for K-State that game where I feel like nobody even cared about what happened at Hilton, which
No, yeah, and that you're exactly right. Like, once the game starts, like, the atmosphere can kind of take over, and it's that game's that game. I knew there'd be a crap ton of people there after what happened in Ames and in the
true.
following, or the weekend following, I should say.
And I think the fans have also just really bought into this little, run that Kansas State has gone, because what was it, after the Iowa State started, what was it, like a 6-game losing streak for them?
Yeah, I think they
towards
went
the middle of the
1-8 in their last 9 or something.
Yeah,
Not that I was counting.
But I mean, kind of what you were saying, Christian, like they know that they can still have a shot to make the NCAA tournament, so this win definitely mattered to them, along with the stuff that happened in Ames.
Yeah, I feel like it really
might not have happened.
Yeah, accusations. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, it did feel like it was the team who wanted it more. Like, I feel like Kansas State wanted to make the NCAA tournament more than TJ wanted to get to Omaha, which at the end of the day, that's just kind of how it was.
That's a good point.
Yeah, you can put it, you can measure it against each other, but they don't want that. They just want to win the next game in front of them.
Yeah, I mean, and that's
if
what
they're-
TJ
yeah.
was saying was focus. But then, after the game, he's like, our effort just like was not there. Just uncharacteristically we lost focus, we lost effort. Just was not the way that they played. And you could tell he was.
And obviously my boss Chris Williams loves to say this, but coaches lie. At Jerome Tang specifically, but no, well, they reviewed the film and couldn't. There's no proof out there. Like fundamentally, there is no proof whatsoever of anything happening, which is what makes that story so crazy. But no, there's aspects to it where maybe he wasn't surprised that his team didn't come out with the energy that they had in game 20, but he's not going to say that in the microphone.
Yeah. I mean, you could just kind of tell how he was afterwards. I think, obviously, I don't think he was happy at all with their performance. I mean, it really did seem like the team was unfocused, but TJ wasn't, because TJ, he came in, he's clearly upset about the loss, and raspy voice, obviously been screaming at the team the whole entire game. I mean, you could tell that he was not out of that game one bit, where some of the players throughout the game were just kind of like, this atmosphere, what's going on in this game, how are we going to come back from this?
Yeah.
And that's just kind of the vibe we got from the players on the court.
And TJ said in his presser, he's like, as much as I'm going to, talk to them and adjust from this game, it is just moving forward from here on out. Like, you can't dwell on a loss like this to end the regular season, which really doesn't have that much stakes for Iowa State in general.
I guess, yeah. And then, I mean, going back to the atmosphere, because, I mean, kind of a crazy atmosphere to be in. The biggest part for me was when they were on that, like 18-10, I think they were up, and then Kansas State hit, like, their next three-pointers.
Yeah.
It was just, that was when they had missed everything up to that point, and then just everything started falling. They hit one, and it was the seniors, too. The seniors would put up a shot, it would hit, the crowd would go insane, just all the energy would flow into them, and then they do a heat check, and then that would go in. And then I'm like, okay, well, this is kind of where it's starting to snowball, and Iowa State was just kind of out of it at that point.
Yeah, that was it snowballed. I mean, that's one of those, like, oh man, you probably aren't going to win this one.
And they put it in they got it into 5 points in the second half with the 10-0 run Iowa State did, but after that, Kansas State just punched them right back. I mean, it
was like 4 to go.
Yeah, something like that. And you thought, like, okay, well, this is just this would be like the 5th straight game where Iowa State plays really poorly for the first, 30, 35 minutes, and then they lock in for the last 5. But Kansas State came out, and I'm sure it was like a 3. And then the big one was they had, I think it was a senior that dunked, and the crowd went nuts. And I was like, well, that's the dagger for sure.
Well, there was like 3 or 4 daggers at the end.
That's true.
I mean, one of the Facebook comments said it best on one of your articles. You can't really rely on our defense to create offense. What they said was, how about we rely on the offense to create points as opposed to the defense creating points? Because, I mean, they've relied on the defense to create points for the last 4 or 5 games now. Mm-hmm. And, I mean, it's worked, but obviously it's not always going to work. And, I mean, once they didn't even have 30 points at the half, I mean, it's gonna be an uphill battle.
Mm-hmm. Well, and shout out to, he also used to write for the Daily, Aaron Marner, or work for the Daily either. Mm-hmm. He wrote also. But you get what I'm saying. He had tweeted a stat out that Iowa State has played 3 of their last 4 games against top 25 defenses. And
that's true.
It's tough to, work on your offense against defense that's apt to stop you. Now, then we go back to, is this February? Is this they play really hard defense and they're getting tired down the stretch? Are guys injured? Mm-hmm. What's going on? And that all of these factors can all be, and that's typically what it is, right? Everything plays a little bit of a factor into it. But you just don't know what's causing, the offensive ruts and stuff. Yeah. Coaching staff should know, maybe.
You would hope so.
Are you predicting that all of this stuff comes together for Iowa State to get upset in the first round of the tournament? the NCAA
I
tournament.
wouldn't predict them to lose in the first round. I don't think.
Well, it's actually interesting you bring that up because
the
they're-
last time I saw them be a top 3 seed, I watched them lose the first game of the entire weekend. So
that's tough. That's tough.
But yeah,
Yeah, but the first matchup could be, well, it will be either Texas or Kansas State. And you talk about top 25 defenses. If they get Kansas State again, obviously Kansas State can travel well from Manhattan to Kansas City because,
It'd actually be really similar, too, because they played Baylor their last game of the season last year and won. And then they would play them again in the Big 12 tournament. It'd be a similar situation. Maybe Kansas State beats them in the final game, then plays them in the Big 12 tournament.
well, except that Iowa State beat them twice. They beat Baylor at the end of the last season and in the tournament.
now you're comparing semantics on a time is the flat circle take.
That's true.
Yeah, a whole lot of stuff can go on, but I mean, it is kind of interesting to see that they are struggling against top 25 defenses because that just seems like the MO for the Big 12 is just defense. There's obviously some teams that are higher up on the offensive side, but a lot of the teams that have find success are the defensive teams. I mean, you look at Iowa State and Houston, and obviously Kansas State. TCU has been pretty good on defense. I mean, there's a lot of these teams that have hit their really good strides off their defense. And I feel like once we get past the Big 12 tournament and into the NCAAs, that's when we'll kind of see when Iowa State, maybe what the issues are, but also what their potential is kind of. And I hope that we see the potential on a run through the NCAA tournament as opposed to seeing their potential in a disappointing loss like last season. But, I mean, I guess all we can really do is wait and see. Got a game tomorrow for the women's side, and then obviously the men are starting up here soon, so exciting time of the year.
Are we throwing it to the hockey segment?
Yep. Going over to hockey. But thanks everybody for watching another episode of The Daily Dish, and we will be back soon with more content.